My parents demanded I hand over my $30,000 college fund to my spoiled sister, then tried to steal it when I refused. I'm 19, a college student, and for as long as I can remember, my relationship with my family has been strained. It mostly comes down to the fact that I've never really fit in with them. I've always been different, more independent, more focused on working hard to get ahead. I put in the effort, kept my grades up, and even landed a scholarship to help with tuition. I thought that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally respect me for it. But I was wrong. No matter what I did, I could never compete with my sister. Paige has always been the favorite. She's spoiled, entitled, and completely used to getting her way. My parents dote on her, bend over backward for her, and expect me to do the same. It's been obvious for years that she's their golden child, while I'm just the responsible one, the one expected to clean up the messes, make sacrifices, and fend for myself. Every time she screws up, it somehow becomes my problem to fix. Despite all that, I worked hard and managed to save up $30,000 for college. That money didn't come easy. I earned most of it through part-time jobs and scholarships, putting away every dollar I could. To me, it represented freedom. A chance to build my own future, one where I wouldn't have to rely on anyone else. But to my parents? It was just another asset they could pull from whenever Paige needed something. And sure enough, that moment came. Paige is 24, but you'd never guess it by the way she acts. She's never had to work for anything, and it shows. Right now, she's unemployed, not because she can't find a job, but because she refuses to. She claims she's figuring things out, but all she really does is sit around and do nothing. Despite that, she decided she wanted a new apartment, something fancy, in a nice part of town. Of course, she had no money saved and no income to pay for it. That's when my parents called me in for a talk. They didn't ease into it, didn't try to soften the blow. They sat me down and flat out told me that Paige had found her dream apartment but was short on money for the deposit. And because of that, they expected me to hand over my entire college fund, all $30,000, to help her secure the place. I thought they were joking at first. I waited for the punchline. But then came the real bombshell. They weren't asking. They were demanding. And if I refused, I could pack my things and get out. Just like that, they made it painfully clear that my future didn't matter. That everything I'd worked for, sacrificed for, was worth less to them than making sure Paige got what she wanted. But they weren't done yet. My mom played the family comes first card, while my dad fed me some ridiculous line about how Paige had always been there for me, a blatant lie. Then came the guilt trips, the emotional manipulation. They made it sound like I was a terrible brother, a selfish person, for even hesitating. That if I was truly a good son, I'd give Paige the money without a second thought. I was in shock. Completely blindsided. My own parents were trying to strong-arm me into throwing away my future for the sake of my sister's comfort. When I finally found my voice, I asked how they could possibly think this was fair. How they could expect me to give up everything I had worked for while Paige had done absolutely nothing to help herself. My dad just shrugged and said it was about keeping the family together. My mom told me Paige needed the apartment more than I needed my savings. That was the moment I realized something. No matter what I said, they wouldn't care. There was no reasoning with them. They weren't interested in fairness. The only thing that mattered to them was making sure Paige had what she wanted. For days, I felt trapped. I kept going back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me thought about giving in, just to keep a roof over my head. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. Why should I have to throw away everything I had worked for just because Paige refused to take responsibility for herself? But standing my ground had consequences. If I refused, I had nowhere to go. No backup plan. I even considered reaching out to extended family, but I knew it would be useless. Most of them were just as fooled by Paige's sweet, innocent act as my parents were. I had to be smart about this. So, I started preparing for the worst. First, I did my research. I made sure that, legally, my parents couldn't touch my money without my consent. Then, I secured all my important documents, my birth certificate, passport, bank information, so they couldn't use them against me. Quietly, I began packing up my valuables and moving them to a friend's place, just in case I had to leave in a hurry. I also reached out to my college's housing office, hoping they might have emergency accommodations. They didn't, but they pointed me towards some local resources that could help if I suddenly found myself without a home. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. When I finally confronted my parents, I made it clear I wasn't giving them a dime. If that meant they wanted me gone, then fine, I'd leave. My dad lost it. He called me selfish, ungrateful. My mom started crying, acting like I was the one tearing the family apart over a little money. A little money? If it was so little, why didn't they just pay for Paige's apartment themselves? Paige, of course, had a complete meltdown. She screamed that I was ruining her life, that I didn't care about her happiness. My parents just glared at me, waiting for me to cave. But I stood firm. I told them if they wanted me out, I'd be gone by the end of the week. What followed was the worst few days of my life. My parents barely spoke to me, and when they did, it was only to throw guilt in my face. My mom ignored me completely, while my dad muttered snide remarks anytime I was in the room. Paige wouldn't even look at me, acting as if I had betrayed her. Every moment in that house was thick with tension, with unspoken threats, with manipulation designed to break me down. But I didn't budge. I kept making preparations. I quietly moved the rest of my valuables out, made arrangements to stay with a friend if I had to. I even reached out to others, explaining the situation, and some of them encouraged me to consider legal action if my parents tried anything drastic. And then, the breaking point came. One morning, I discovered my parents had tried to access my bank account. They had actually attempted to take the money themselves, assuming they could just deal with the fallout later. But I had seen it coming. I had already emptied the account and closed it. When they found out, they were furious. My dad exploded, calling me ungrateful, telling me I was tearing the family apart. My mom just sobbed, asking over and over how I could do this to them. But I was done. They had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. I told them straight up I was finished being their scapegoat. And if they wanted me gone? Well, they were about to get their wish. Leaving was never the hard part. I had already made peace with walking away. What I wasn't going to do, though, was let them take a single cent of my money. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them control the narrative. If I had just slipped out quietly, they would have twisted the story however they wanted. I could already imagine the lies they'd tell, how I was ungrateful, how I abandoned my family, how poor, helpless Paige was left struggling because of my selfishness. I refused to let that happen. So, I took matters into my own hands. I laid everything out on social media. Every ugly detail. The way they tried to strong-arm me into giving up my savings. The threats, the emotional blackmail. I even posted screenshots, messages from them demanding my money, the bank alert proving they had tried to access my account without permission. And I made sure people saw it. I tagged my parents, my sister, and even a few of their close friends and extended family members. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. The reaction was explosive. Almost instantly, messages started pouring in. Most people were on my side, horrified by what they were reading. They called out my parents and Paige for their entitlement and manipulation. Even some of my extended family relatives who had always kept their distance reached out, shocked and disgusted by what they'd learned. They had no idea things had gotten this bad. Of course, not everyone was willing to believe the truth. A few of my parents' closest friends tried to defend them, insisting that there must be another side to the story. But they were drowned out by the sheer number of people calling my family out. And then, the fallout began. Word spread fast. My parents had always been obsessed with maintaining a perfect image, respectable, loving parents, a model family. That illusion shattered overnight. My dad's work relationships became strained as colleagues began to see him in a different light. My mom, who had always thrived on social status, suddenly found herself on the outside of the very circle she once dominated. As for Paige, she lost everything she had been banking on. The landlord who was supposed to rent her the apartment caught wind of the drama and backed out. Suddenly, her grand plan of living in luxury with my money fell apart, and she had no one left to manipulate into bailing her out. She was furious, of course, blaming me for ruining her life. But I didn't care. They had done this to themselves. With nowhere else to go, I moved in with a friend who had been incredibly supportive throughout everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was a hell of a lot better than staying in that toxic house. Adjusting to full independence wasn't easy, but it was liberating. For the first time in my life, I could focus entirely on myself, my studies, my future, without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering what my family would try to take from me next. But my parents weren't about to let go without a fight. At first, they bombarded my phone with calls and messages, switching between threats and desperate pleas. They demanded I take the post down, come back home, fix the mess I had made. When that didn't work, they changed tactics, twisting the story to make themselves the victims. They claimed I had overreacted, that they had just been trying to help Paige through a tough time. But by then, it was too late. People had already seen the truth, and there was no covering it up. I refused to engage. I blocked them on every platform, cut off all lines of contact. When their persistence didn't die down, I even sought legal advice about possibly getting a restraining order. I knew it was a drastic step, but I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their mess. Surprisingly, after everything went public, A few estranged relatives, family members who had always stayed on the sidelines reached out, offering their support. Some even apologized for not stepping in sooner. And then, a huge relief, my college heard about my situation and offered additional financial aid. It was a game changer, giving me the extra security I needed to move forward. Through it all, I changed. I became more confident, more self-reliant. Without the constant stress of dealing with my family's manipulation, my academic performance actually improved. I built new friendships, formed a real support network, people I knew I could actually count on. Now, I'm focused on complete financial independence, making sure I never have to rely on my family for anything again. And honestly, I'm seriously considering cutting ties with them for good. The cycle of toxicity has lasted long enough, and I refuse to let it continue. It won't be easy, but I'm ready. I'm building a future where I don't have to live in fear of the next betrayal. Update, 3 months later. It's been 3 months since I first shared my story, and to say things have been chaotic would be an understatement. First off, I just want to say thank you to everyone who supported me. Your advice helped me get through some of the toughest moments. After I left and went public, my parents and Paige completely lost it. They kept trying to contact me, alternating between angry threats and guilt trips. I stuck to my no-contact rule, but I won't lie, it wasn't easy. About a week after I moved out, my mom showed up at my friend's place. To this day, I have no idea how she found out where I was staying. She was crying, begging me to come home, saying they had made a mistake and wanted to make things right. For a split second, I almost felt bad for her. Then she started talking about how I was the one tearing the family apart. How Paige was suffering because of me. That was all I needed to hear. Nothing had changed. They weren't sorry for what they did, they were just sorry for the consequences. I told her to leave, or I'd call the police. She stormed off, but not before throwing in some dramatic parting words about how I was breaking her heart. The next day, my dad tried to call my college, fishing for information about my schedule and classes. Luckily, I had already spoken to administration and made sure they wouldn't release anything. But it freaked me out that he was trying to track me down. Then Paige started escalating things. She began showing up at places she knew I frequented, the library, the coffee shop near campus, even outside some of my classes. Sometimes she would scream at me for ruining her life, other times she'd try to sweet-talk me into giving her the money. It got so bad that I had to change my daily routines and ask friends to walk with me between classes. And then came the ultimate betrayal. About a month after I left, my aunt, my mom's sister, reached out, saying she wanted to talk. I was hesitant, but she had always been kind to me, so I agreed to meet her in a public place. When I arrived, I realized I had walked straight into a trap. My parents were there, waiting at a nearby table. I didn't even sit down. I turned around and walked right out. I blocked my aunt's number that same day. The social media fallout hasn't stopped either. My parents tried to do damage control, posting their own version of events, claiming I was a troubled kid who had stolen money and run away. Some people believed them, but most saw through it. Watching distant relatives and family friends take sides was tough, but I was grateful for the ones who stood by me. And Paige? Well, she took it to another level. Leaving wasn't enough. I had to make sure my family never had a chance to twist the story. If I slipped away quietly, they'd rewrite history, painting me as the villain while making themselves look like the victims. I wasn't going to let that happen. But I never expected what Paige would do next. She launched a GoFundMe campaign. The headline? Escaping Financial Abuse. She claimed she was a victim, trapped in a toxic family situation, and needed help to rebuild her life. And the best part? She dragged my name into it, flipping the story to make it sound like I was the abuser. She spun it so well that strangers, people who had never met either of us, were sending her money out of pity. I was furious. This wasn't just another manipulation, this was public slander. She was exploiting people's kindness, cashing in on a sob story at my expense. And I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I got a lawyer involved immediately. It took some back and forth, but eventually, GoFundMe took her campaign down. That didn't stop Paige from throwing a tantrum, blaming me for ruining her chance at freedom. As if freedom was something she had ever struggled for. And then, my parents escalated things. Threats, lies, and lawyers. Not long after, they hit me with a legal threat. Their claim? That I owed them money for raising me. That my savings, the money I worked for, actually belonged to them. It was ridiculous. But the sheer audacity of it scared me enough to check with my lawyer. He reassured me they had no case, but he also gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me: document everything. Every text, every call, every attempt they made to interfere in my life, because if they were willing to make a legal threat once, they might try again. And, as I would soon learn, they weren't done trying to control me. The truth about Paige. About 2.5 months after I left, I got an unexpected email from Grant, Paige's ex-boyfriend. They had broken up months before everything went down, and while I never really knew him well, I had always thought he was a decent guy. Turns out, he had seen my social media post and wanted to reach out. He apologized for not speaking up sooner. And then he told me something that made my stomach turn. Paige had been cheating on him the entire time they were together. Not just casually, she was strategic about it, seeking out guys who would buy her expensive gifts, take her on vacations, or fund the lifestyle she thought she deserved. She constantly complained that life was unfair, that she shouldn't have to work for anything. I shouldn't have been surprised, but somehow, hearing it spelled out like that hit differently. And then Grant dropped another bombshell. Paige had been fired from her last job for stealing. My parents had covered it up, paying off what she stole so the company wouldn't press charges. I saw red. These were the same parents who demanded I hand over my money, the same parents who acted like Paige was some helpless victim while expecting me to clean up her messes. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, they were paying off theft charges to protect her from the consequences of her own actions. At that moment, whatever tiny shred of guilt I had left about walking away disappeared completely. A family connection I never expected. A few weeks later, my phone rang. The number wasn't one I recognized, and I almost ignored it. But something told me to pick up. It was my grandfather, my dad's father. We had never been close. He lived in another state, and I had only seen him a handful of times growing up. But he told me he had heard what happened through a cousin and wanted to hear my side of the story. At first, I hesitated. After what happened with my aunt, I wasn't about to trust another family member blindly. But as we talked, I realized he wasn't calling to judge me. He was calling because he understood. He told me that he'd had his own problems with my dad over the years and that he wasn't surprised by what had happened. He even apologized for not being more involved in my life and, to my shock, offered to help me financially if I needed it. I was touched, but I told him I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. He respected that but made sure I knew his offer was always open. That call meant more to me than I could put into words. It reminded me that, just because my parents and sister were toxic, it didn't mean I was alone. Uncovering more family betrayals. That conversation made me wonder if there were other family members who had experienced the same kind of mistreatment I had. I reached out to Mallory, a cousin on my mom's side who I had always gotten along with. What she told me made my blood boil. A few years ago, she had been going through a rough divorce and needed a place to stay for a few weeks. My parents initially offered to let her stay with them until Paige complained that she didn't want someone invading her space. So what did my parents do? They kicked Mallory out after just 3 days, leaving her to sleep on friends' couches until she could find a place of her own. The same parents who demanded I sacrifice everything for Paige had thrown a struggling relative out on the street just because Paige didn't feel like sharing space. At that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about favoritism. My parents weren't just supporting Paige, they were enabling her at the expense of everyone around them. And I wasn't going to be part of that cycle anymore. Crossing the line again. Meanwhile, I was still trying to figure out my long-term living situation. I had been staying with my friend's family, but I knew it wasn't a permanent solution. I started looking for a cheap apartment near campus, but everything was way out of my budget. Then, out of nowhere, my bank called. Someone had tried to access my new account using my social security number. They had flagged it as suspicious activity and blocked the attempt. I knew immediately who it was. My parents. That was it. That was the moment I knew they weren't going to stop. I filed a police report and put a freeze on my credit. Then I went back to my lawyer and started the process of getting a restraining order against both my parents and Paige. The final break. The day before the hearing, my mom called me in a full-blown panic. She was sobbing, saying she had heard about the restraining order and begging me not to go through with it. She told me it would destroy the family, that it would ruin their lives. I told her they should have thought about that before they tried to steal from me and harass me. Then I hung up. The hearing was intense. My parents and Paige showed up with a lawyer of their own, painting me as an ungrateful, troubled kid who had lashed out at his loving family. But I had proof. Texts, emails, bank records, everything. The judge saw through their lies and granted the restraining order. As I was leaving the courthouse, Paige tried to stop me. For a second, she actually looked remorseful. But then her face twisted with rage, and she spat out, "I hope you're happy now. You've ruined all our lives." A friend stepped in and led her away. That was the last time I saw her. About 3 months ago, I got a call that I never saw coming. It was my uncle, my dad's brother. We had never been particularly close, so I was immediately on edge, expecting some kind of setup. But his tone was different. He actually sounded concerned. And what he told me, it was worse than I could have ever imagined. Paige had gotten mixed up with some shady people and racked up a massive amount of debt. My parents, in their infinite wisdom, had decided to bail her out again. But this time, they couldn't just cover it up or throw money at the problem. Because they didn't have the money. So what did they do? They took out a second mortgage on the house, plunging themselves even deeper into financial ruin. And even then, it wasn't enough. And that's when things took a violent turn. One night, the people Paige owed money to showed up at my parents' house. According to my uncle, it got ugly. He didn't have all the details, but what he did know was that the police were involved and my dad ended up in the hospital with a broken arm. And yet, they still protect her. Here's the part that really messes with my head. Even after all this, after she nearly got them killed, my parents are still covering for her. When the police questioned them, they lied. They told them it was just a random break-in, refusing to admit the truth about why it had happened. But, of course, word spread through the family. My uncle heard everything, and he wasn't the only one. And then, just a few days after his call, my parents started messaging me again. The final attempt at manipulation. At first, I hesitated. Against my better judgment, I unblocked them because, despite everything, they were still my parents. Big mistake. They weren't reaching out to apologize. They weren't reaching out to admit they had been wrong. They were begging me to come home. Not because they missed me. Not because they had finally seen the light. No. Because they needed my help. They tried to guilt me, saying that if I had just given them the money when they first asked, none of this would have happened. Can you believe that? After everything that had gone down, after they stole from me, tried to ruin my future, and threw me away like I was nothing, they still had the audacity to act like this was my fault. I ignored their messages. I wasn't falling for it. Because, by that point, my life had actually started coming together. Moving forward, for good. I had finally saved up enough to move out of my friend's place and into my own apartment. It wasn't the fanciest spot in town, but it was secure and that was all that mattered. It was a little further from campus, but the peace of mind was worth it. For the first time in my life, I felt safe. Until Paige showed up at my door. Paige crosses the line. I don't know how she found out where I lived. I had just moved recently, and I had taken every precaution to keep my address private. But somehow, she tracked me down. She was a mess. Crying, shaking, begging for money. Saying she was in danger, that she had nowhere else to go. I stood my ground. I told her to leave or I was calling the cops. And that's when she lost it. She started screaming, full-on meltdown, yelling that I was killing her, that if anything happened to her, it would be my fault. It was awful. I slammed the door in her face and called my lawyer the second she left. We're already in the process of extending my restraining order to include my current address. I also notified my landlord and warned my neighbors, just in case Paige or my parents tried anything. I refused to let them drag me back into their chaos. The lies keep spreading. As if all that wasn't enough, I found out through some extended family members that my parents were now blaming me for Paige's situation. According to them, I'm the one who introduced Paige to these shady people. They even claimed I owe money to them, too. It's complete nonsense, but some relatives actually believe it. I started getting hateful messages on social media, people calling me a traitor, a liar, even a criminal. I had no choice but to start blocking people left and right. At this point, I don't even care. The people who actually matter. Through all of this, I built something better than the toxic family I left behind. I've made real friends, people who actually care about me. People who don't expect me to sacrifice everything for them. We're even planning a celebration together, something to mark the fact that, despite everything, I've made it through. And as for my parents and Paige? The consequences finally catch up. Word on the street is that they're facing foreclosure on the house. They gambled everything on protecting Paige. And now, they're about to lose everything. And yeah, part of me feels bad. But a bigger part of me knows they brought this on themselves. I can't help but wonder how different things could have been, how much pain could have been avoided if they had just treated me like a son instead of a walking bank account. But that's not my problem anymore. Final thoughts. So that's where things stand. I won't pretend it's been easy. There are days when I miss having a family, even a dysfunctional one. Holidays are especially hard. But at the end of the day, I'm free. And for the first time in my life, my future belongs to me. To everyone who's followed my story, who's supported me through this, I can't thank you enough. I don't know where I'd be without the encouragement, advice, and kindness of people who reminded me that I'm not crazy, that I was right to stand my ground, and that I deserved better. And now, I'm finally building a life where I don't have to look over my shoulder or I don't have to fear the next betrayal. I survived. And I'm never going back.